Hey guys, Zen Cop here. It is Saturday, the 26th. I hope everyone had a good Thanksgiving. I'm going to work on not saying as much. I've been listening to some of my previous video blogs, and I didn't really realize how many times I said in the beginning. Kind of redundant. And not to mention, I used to make fun of Governor Newsom for doing it. And yeah, the guy sounded like a maniac. And now I sound like him too. So I'm going to try and clean this up a little bit. I'm not using a script today. Hard habit to break. But generally I sit down and I type out some ideas, thoughts, and just sort of use that script as like a running, I don't know, what's the teleprompter, I guess. But today, when I sat down to decide what I was going to talk about, and then once I decided, it sort of went in a ton of different directions, and that is the topic of homelessness. And homelessness not only affects law enforcement, it affects everyone, everywhere. And homelessness is nothing new. As soon as man has been able to have a home, whether it was a cave or a hut or whatever, there's always been some part of society that has not been able to participate in that lifestyle because of XYZ. And that's nothing new. However, I would say over the past, 3 decades, we've watched homelessness grow into a different epidemic, and that is an epidemic of narcotics, not just a lack of housing. And just so everyone knows, when it comes to my opinion and my experience in this very chaotic and convoluted topic, I have been dealing with homelessness in my career since I became a cop, essentially. But I also spent a few years working for my agency's homeless outreach team. And that was a real eye-opener in terms of seeing what the actual issues were. And the whole time, you can ask anybody who's worked in any realm of public safety, and they are going to say the same thing. Addiction is the reason why we have homelessness. And I would say as of the past decade, mainly because of opiates, specifically heroin, and now looking at fentanyl as probably the biggest catalyst. And the misconception with society and the reality of homelessness is that people assume that homelessness is a result of a lack of housing and mental health issues. And I know that I can say for certainty that the majority of the homeless population, I'm going to talk about California in particular because that's where I work and where I live, the far majority are not suffering from a lack of housing or mental health issues. They are suffering from drug addiction. And drug addiction, in turn, can develop some type of narcotic psychosis as a result of. So this concept that, they had a mental health issue and they lost everything and slowly became homeless, that's not necessarily true. And if you start talking to some of these folks and you ask them, well, what made you homeless? A lot of them will say, I lost my job, my marriage fell apart, I lost my house, I lost my apartment. And if you take that for gospel, okay, cool, that's where the tailspin started. That's fine, but you're only going to get that same answer over and over again unless you probe further and you start asking them, well, how did you lose your job? And the response would be, well, I showed up to work a few times high, or I stopped going to work because I was high, or I stopped blah, blah, blah. Okay, that makes sense. You lost your job because of something. And then when it comes to housing, well, I lost my job, so I couldn't pay my rent. So I bought drugs instead of paying my rent, and then I got evicted, and then I had my car, and eventually I sold my car for dope, and now I'm living in a tent behind Walmart, making enough money to buy dope. That's usually the scenario. Very seldom is there a scenario where someone becomes homeless as a result of financial turmoil. And even when those individuals exist, there's no narcotic or addictive element to them. And 10 times out of 10, those people will be homeless for a few months and they would figure it out. And I would never see them again. The narcotic aspect makes it so much more difficult for people to recover and then be successful in the realm of recovery. And oddly enough, when I started to ask more questions. I started to ask them at the end of our conversation, if you can get sober right now, today, and, you know, essentially have a place to live, would you? A lot of them said no. They were quite content with their life and how they were living it. And that's the mentality for the majority of homeless people in this nation. I mean, maybe the world. But we have to consider, too, that's not sobriety talking. That's addiction talking. And addiction splits you into two different people. There's sober John Smith, and then there's addict John Smith. And addict John Smith will lie, cheat, and steal to maintain that lifestyle. Sober John Smith makes good decisions and doesn't like addictive John Smith. And now that we're dealing with an epidemic, I would say, of extreme catastrophic proportions when it comes to the narcotic element, and then the death rate as well. And that's kind of a weird segue, but it's related. When we have the narcotic element among the homeless population, and again, I'm just speaking for my experience in California, right now, I would say heroin / fentanyl is probably the most detrimental hit we have ever received as a society in terms of the illegal narcotic market and what it does to people. And when I say people, I'm not saying homeless people, because the fentanyl element spills over into everyone, not just homeless, not just addicts. But I would say over the past couple of years, we have seen as a nation fentanyl killing a lot of first-time users, people who aren't necessarily even into drugs, but experiment one time and die as a result. And that's a pretty deep rabbit hole to dive into, but if we consider the sources and how easy it is to get, that's pretty alarming right now. When I first started in law enforcement, you didn't see heroin a lot. It was very rare. You saw meth all the time, but heroin was a rarity. And when you found it, it was like, holy shit, that's heroin. Now, I would say heroin surpasses a lot. I mean, meth's still around, don't get me wrong, but this new blow up, especially considering the fentanyl market, is pretty wild. And our society is slowly falling apart, and we are losing a lot of the, stability in terms of people making recovery. And now we're just sort of triaging people who are actively addicted. The days of seeing people get sober and housed are kind of in the past. The housing is so competitive and so hard to get. I think that a lot of people just lose faith in the process. And I saw that firsthand. I saw people who would come to me, I need to go right now, today, because they were in the right mindset. I will go today. And I'm sorry, we don't have any spaces available. There's no facilities that'll do an intake for you, and you have to be sober for X amount, blah, 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 blah. Whatever. They wanted to do it today. Tomorrow doesn't work for whatever reason. And that's how drugs work. And unless you experience it yourself or you see it for yourself in real life, it's hard to understand that. A lot of people just say, well, get it together, quit. And to tell a heroin addict to quit, it's not like quitting smoking. It's very different. It's so intricate that there's almost like a labor chart that you have for childbirth, where you have to meet a certain criteria before you can even be admitted to a hospital to go through the detox process, which in itself can actually kill you unless you're under medical care. It's pretty rough. And we have these facilities that are getting overrun. Our ERs are inundated with homeless people. I mean, it is so bad that it's visible everywhere in terms of visual blight. And I want everyone to think about where they're living now. And if you've lived there for any significant amount of time, I want you to think about how much that city or town has changed over the last decade. And think about the things that you see. And when I say visual blight, I mean just that. The part of society that you don't want to be there, that you look around and just kind of go, what happened to this place? And I hear people saying that so much lately. What happened to this place? What happened to the town that I grew up in? Well, homelessness. That visual blight issue became prevalent when we had programs like AB 109, Prop 47, all of these things that quite literally crippled our ability to impact the criminal narcotic market and took away our ability to make things illegal and hold criminals accountable. And for those of you who don't know, and I'm not going to go super into it, but Proposition 47 was labeled the Safe Schools Act And if you read the verbiage, it sounded great. Even the title itself. Well, yeah, that's awesome. Make the schools safe. Prop 47 essentially dropped misdemeanors to infractions, felonies to misdemeanors, and it made a lot of what would be felony drug possessions now not very prosecutable or not very savory in terms of the justice system. And that's a whole other issue in itself. But to think that we decriminalized certain things in an effort to make schools safer because in theory the money saved would be reversed and blah, blah, blah. No, bullshit. It didn't work. And to this day, I still blame Prop 47 for the reason why we are where we are as a state. The early release programs were a horrible idea. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that people can't change. I have family and friends who I know that have been through the incarceration system and they have left and they have succeeded admirably. They have recovered in every sense of the word. But there are some people who should not be released early. And these people often reoffend and often reoffend in some of the most heinous of ways, but that doesn't get talked about and it doesn't get recognized. There are some people who should still be in jail, and that's okay. They haven't learned their lesson yet, or even better, if they're not going to learn their lesson, then they need to stay there. And that's for a safety of society issue. That's not a speaking point for politicians. Everyone should be on that same page. And I get that there are certain things that we can go back and forth on, but for the majority of society, I think we should all say, yes, violent crimes are bad and they should be held accountable. Drug-related offenses are important, but there needs to be a plan of action. There needs to be a way that the punishment fits the crime. At the same time, help is offered in a variety of ways. And if we see success in large-scale proportions, we'd see success among society. But honestly, I think we're too far gone. I think that we are going to have to turn into Gotham before anyone really takes this problem seriously. And the funny part is that no one really recognizes a problem until it happens to them. It's the same concept of a home invasion. If you live 20 years and nothing ever happens to your home, you're going to assume that nothing bad will ever happen to you again. And then one day your house gets broken into in the middle of the night and you're screaming from the hilltops about how there's not enough public safety. That's the concept that most people have. And until you see it in your own town, it will more than likely get ignored. Oh, we don't have a homeless problem. We don't have this. We don't have that. Well, we do. And it's a problem that's going to be here for a long time unless we change some things and quickly. And I hate making things political, but I hate it. It is what it is. Sorry, but leftist ideologies don't keep people safe. And leftist ideologies create chaos. They create problems. They create crime. I can't even put into words how frustrating it is watching my home state, the place that I call home where I grew up, slowly just burning at the hands of our government leaders. And our governor tries to reverse the blame back on the leaders of the cities and the counties. That's completely unfair, and that's not true. State legislature is the reason why we are where we are right now. It has nothing to do with the individual cities and counties. There are county ordinances that can be passed. There are city ordinances that can be, but that doesn't change the grand scheme of what we, the people, have chosen. When I say we, the people, we voted for it. And I think a lot of people either vote blindly or they vote thinking they're doing the right thing. I mean, if you read Prop 47 at face value, you would totally vote for it. I don't blame anyone who did because it was written in a way that glamorized the highlights, but it didn't exactly share the reality behind the measure. And that's unfortunate, but it is where we are. But long term, I don't see a lot of options on the table, which is unfortunate. But I think that in order for us to see success, we're going to have to change some things, and very quickly, guys. Again, topic that I could talk about for hours. I'm going to keep it to a quick under 15 minutes here. Thanks for listening. If you did, I appreciate you guys tuning in as usual. I will be back next week and maybe have something different to talk about, or maybe the same thing. I don't know, guys. Enjoy your holiday weekend. Thank you, and stay safe. Have a good weekend.